I'll say, well, maybe Nike's the best brand. I don't know if that guy's going to go to a running store and buy a Nike shoe, or if he's going to go to a thrift store and buy a used Nike shoe and then say like, well, I bought a Nike because the guy said it was good and it ended up being terrible, you know?
Are you running a marathon? Oh my god, I could never run a marathon. You sure about that? My god, a marathon, that's like 42 kilometers, 26 miles. I don't understand those people.
That used to be me, but not anymore. Welcome to the Marathon Podcast. My name is Christian Warwick, aka Warwick Runs on different platforms. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate that. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. Today we are having Mike with us, or you might know him better as Kofuzi. He is a big name in the running community. You might have seen his shoe reviews or race recaps on YouTube. We had a great chat today about everything running shoes. Obviously, he knows a lot about running shoes, and I had a lot of questions for him. I did ask him what his favorite shoes were. I also talked to him about how it is to be able to have all these shoes all the time, and if he kind of wanted to stick to a few of them, or if he just actually used different shoes every day and new shoes every day. A really cool conversation where we also talked about his own running. He's actually now in Sydney preparing for the Sydney Marathon on Sunday. And just a genuinely nice conversation with Mike. And again, I love talking to people who are passionate about running. And I feel like that's kind of something that connects us immediately. I just want to thank you for listening to the Marathon Podcast over the last few weeks, because it's been so much fun to see that there are more people listening. I've loved seeing people tag the Marathon Podcast when you guys are listening. And this week has been a bit different. I just want to clarify what the Marathon Podcast is going to be like going forward, because now that we have the Sydney Marathon, we obviously have the bonus episode about that this week, just for everyone to know more about that heading into this week and this weekend. And also with it being 2 weeks until the closing of the Boston Marathon registration window period, I felt like we needed an updated overview of what you need to know there. So those two episodes were kind of bonus episodes that came out this week. We had Caitlin on as the first kind of normal episode of the week, and this is the second. So going forward, I'll keep it to 2 podcasts a week, Mondays and Thursdays, and then there might be bonus episodes in there. Sometimes maybe because I have more guests on, and I do want this podcast to be very real time and relevant. So that's one of the reasons why I want to maybe have 3 to 4 podcast episodes every now and then. But as a standard, or what you can at least expect, that Mondays and Thursdays are the Marathon Podcast days. I also am, for those of you who are more interested in films and videos, I am a filmmaker of profession, and I like to document my own journey, although I find it a bit too narcissistic at times. I am still documenting my own journey, and I just posted a new video on my channel, Warwick Runs. Okay, enough about me. Let's jump to the conversation with Kofuzi. Kofuzi, welcome to the Marathon Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here today.
Yeah, it's funny because I realized that you kind of made a brand out of Kofuzi, because I had to look up your actual name before we were to have this conversation. How do you differentiate, like, using those? Do you have that only as your name on your social media, or do you also use Kofuzi other places? Like, how and how did you get to which one is it that you use when you present yourself to people?
Yeah, I mean, so people ask me that a lot, like when they're introducing me, or like if I'm at a public event or something like that, or like sometimes when I go visit like a running shoe brand's headquarters, they'll be like, do you want to be introduced as Kofuzi or Mike, or how should we address you? And I'm like, we're all adults here. Like Mike is great, but the use of Kofuzi comes from the fact I'm older, so I'm 45, turning 46 this year, and so like when I was starting to use the internet, you never used your real name. You always had a handle, and so like when I started posting YouTube videos, I was using a nickname. Like using like Mike Co would be really weird back when I started using like basically the internet. Whether it was like I never got into like MySpace, but like I had like vanity pages and stuff. Learned basics of like HTML so that I could make my own like websites, because that's what people did, because there wasn't social media then. So like back then it was always a nickname. It was never your real name. So that's why like the idea of like, oh, that's very brilliant not to use your name, but using like a kind of creating a brand. I'm like, that's not a lot of business forethought. It's just a relic of how old I am, because we never used our real names.
But it's like you said, so your name is Mike Co, right? So my question then is, where did the last part of it come from? Because the KO makes sense. And then I was curious, how did you get to the handle of the rest of it?
Yeah, so Kofuzi is an old like college nickname that I had given myself. So it's really lame. But like sophomore year in college, this would have been like like 98, 99, maybe 1999. I was taking like an East Asian religions course, and we're learning about Confucius. His last name is Kong, and then the Futsa is like his master teacher, and then that became like anglicized from Konfutsu to Confucius. So I took Futsa to Kofuzi. So that's kind of where that came from. So it was just kind of like a college alter ego kind of thing, like Frank the Tank kind of thing, that became Kofuzi. And then, when I was like, oh, I'll make YouTube videos, I was like, let's resuscitate that one.
It's funny how those names sometimes they just come out of weird things. And then, like you said, you probably never thought about that when you made your channel back then.
Yeah. So like, I never thought it would kind of get to this point where I'd have to explain Kofuzi so many times, so it was just kind of like, whatever, it's just an internet name. It doesn't have to make sense. And then sometimes when I explain it to people, I only tell them the Confucius part, and they're like, oh, that's very cerebral. And then I don't tell them like, oh, well, it's kind of like a drinking name, so it's like like an alter ego in some sense, or that's how it started, So like there's a more like, not tawdry, but like there's a more like not so cerebral side to the Confucius origin of the name. So
yeah. Well, thanks for the explanation, and sorry about having you explain it again. But
no, it's fun. It's always fun to tell the story.
Yeah, I kind of don't think that you need an introduction or like to present yourself. But for those listeners who haven't or who don't know who you are, why don't you present yourself?
Yeah, I'm a non-elite runner who reviews running shoes on YouTube. And so I've been making videos for a long time now. And I guess I could say I'm a professional shoe reviewer. But like, I'm really just a guy that makes videos on the internet.
Yeah. And you are also like, because I think that the first time I actually saw you was not, I don't know if a lot of people have the same introduction to you, but I saw one of the marathon videos that you were filming, like running around, and I remember my first impression was like, why is he running around just filming everyone, and he doesn't seem tired at all? It just seems like he's having a good time. And I remember sitting there thinking that this is great. He's kind of like documenting this marathon, the atmosphere and everything around it in such a real way, and I really appreciated that. But where does that motivation to run a marathon and create that content, where does that motivation come from for you?
I mean, it comes from two places. One is because I want to see it. I wanted to see content like that, and it didn't really exist when I started to make YouTube videos. So like maybe like 2016, 2017, there weren't a lot of people, because the GoPros weren't that good yet, that were taking action cameras into a race to show you what it was like in the race. You would see, someone might have footage of their family member or someone like running by, like once or twice during a race, but you never got to see like the whole in and out of a race. And so was the curiosity was one aspect of it. And two is, as I started making like running shoe review videos, like I always felt like my differentiating factor was that I wasn't just a guy sitting in front of a bunch of shoes and holding it and telling you about it. My whole truth was I will show you me in it. Right. And so like there is kind of like it self-validates when you watch the video because I'm running and I'm showing you the running. And then that just translates to that truth of I have to show it to you, turns into like, well, if I'm running a race, I have to show it to you and I'll show you the race as well. And then it kind of became, from there it grew to where people were watching. I got comments a lot in the beginning where people were like, I don't even want to buy this shoe, but I just like watching these videos. And I'm like, you're in the right place. You're who I'm making these videos for, because I'm that way. I don't want to buy a bunch of these shoes, but I would love to watch videos about them. That's why I'm making these videos. Yeah. And so those people were supporting me and watching the channel and making the comment section a fun place to be. And so I was like, all right, you guys have been following me through all this running and testing. You guys should come along for the race too, because you've been with me all the way. It'd be weird to me at this point to now put the camera down and say this part's for me only. So I was like, all right, we've been here the last 16 weeks, so let's take it to race day too.
Yeah. No, it's really nice. And I remember when I started looking into running the Boston Marathon and watching your videos, those were also, things that meant a lot in terms of being almost prepared for what was there. Like, obviously it's hard to prepare anyone for a marathon course or whatever through a video, but still just feeling what it's like. And I'm sure you've helped a lot of runners by doing that. And yeah, so I guess on behalf of all of us, thank you for that. but I'm curious if we back it up, like even like you like you were saying, you didn't even think about what your handle was when you first started YouTube. And I guess that when you started the channel, you had no idea you would get to where you are today, and that YouTube would be such a big part of your life. How and I'm sure you told this story a lot of times, but how did you get into that game of YouTube, and what made you realize that this was something that you could do full time?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was already making videos, because I've enjoyed just playing around with cameras. Started out with just like digital cameras. I was an early adopter of digital cameras. I bought my first digital camera maybe 2001. And so I've been playing with digital cameras for a long time. I wasn't exactly an early adopter of action cameras. But once they became a little bit more affordable, then I was like super into it. And I was just already making a lot of videos, just for fun. Daily vlogging was really big. I was watching a lot of YouTube. So I was like, I think I could do kind of something like that too. So that's kind of how like the making of videos started. And then at a certain point I started, I'd taken a long break from running, and I started getting back into it, and I started bringing the camera on the run, because I was filming everything I was doing all day anyway. And now that I was running, I was also filming the running. And then that became a lot of fun, and people really weren't watching the other videos, but people started watching the running. I think they saw like a lot of similarities. I'm like, that's a guy that looks like me or is in a similar kind of situation as me, doing what I'm trying to do. And so that's interesting and new, because there wasn't a ton of that on the internet. There was not a lot. There was some of like, you could watch professional athletes run and stuff like that, but there wasn't a ton of like just regular runners on the internet. And so I felt like I wanted to see more of it, so I put more of it out.
And I guess like at some point here, you got to a point where this could be a full-time gig, like we were talking about before we started recording. There's like a lot of things to post, and you need to be on kind of a schedule with these things. How long were you doing YouTube before you actually were able to call it your job?
Yeah, I mean, it's what's hard about it is that like the pandemic really pushed a lot of it, and so like it's hard to say where I would have like kind of chosen to go full time on YouTube, but I ended up going full time on YouTube right around 2020, like middle towards the end of 2020, and by then I had been making videos for about 3 years. So I'd say I was maybe like 600 or 700 videos in at that point, before I started thinking that I could do this full time. And even then, that wouldn't have been enough to go full time, what I was making with YouTube then. Um, so it's kind of hard to say that. But, I went, I think with like a lot of kind of like entrepreneurial type of endeavors, like you don't make the jump when the numbers already work. You have to jump and then make the numbers work, kind of.
Yeah.
And very fortunately for me, and I always try to make sure I say this every time I talk about, becoming a full-time YouTuber, my wife has always been the primary breadwinner in the family, and she's very successful. And so I have a huge safety net.
Yeah.
Other business ventures that I've gone into, not the plan, but like the idea was always like, all right, well, let's try this. I think it's exciting. I think it could work. And if all else fails, I'll just stay home with the kids. Which is something that my wife would have liked and something I would have liked too, but my businesses ended up doing okay. So I was like a victim of my own success in a lot of ways. So I'm not at home with the kids all day like I wouldn't mind being. But I'm also really enjoying what I'm doing now. So it's hopefully a win-win for everybody.
Yeah. And is it sometimes, for me at least, I'm a filmmaker of profession. I feel like I'm living the dream life, making videos or being creative. But then you get to a point where when you start making money on it, that this hobby of mine, right, like it becomes a job. And sometimes it's a little hard to appreciate that, like your creative brain is kind of tired and you have to make content for clients. And then I end up feeling, sometimes I'm telling people that if you want to keep it a hobby, don't make it your job. What is that like for you in terms of the YouTube? Because I'm sure it started out as like just a hobby and something you were doing for fun. Does it still feel like something you're doing for fun, or do you have days where it's like, oh, I wish I didn't have to make this video?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I usually only get that feeling with some certain brand deals, and so like for the content that is like most of the content that I'm making on the channel doesn't have a sponsor backing it. I mean, there's ad revenue behind it, but there's not like a sponsor that's paying me to make the video. And so for those, I love making those. Those are a lot of fun. Sometimes it becomes overwhelming because I'd like to get those out on a certain schedule. And then I also have family obligations. And like I could see how long things are going to take, and I see how little time I have to do all those things. So then that becomes a little bit stressful. But it usually doesn't feel like work. Sometimes when it's like the things, like there's little things that get annoying for me where it's just like, and I've hired a manager to help me deal with a lot of that stuff, where they'll be like, don't forget, you're supposed to post like 3 stories from this trip that's coming up. And I'll be like, oh yeah, I totally forgot. I probably would have ended up posting 5 anyway, but I'm glad that you reminded me, because then I could tag the relevant sponsor, And so there's stuff like that feels like a job. And when I have to have conversations and phone calls about that kind of stuff, that feels like a job. But that also enables me to do more of what I want to do and tackle bigger and more ambitious types of projects. And so, it means to an end. And so, but I feel like every hobby has its own like kind of like bottlenecks and points that are a little bit frustrating. And so you just have to find different ways to get through it, because I think that's all part of the process. And so for me, a lot of this still feels just like a hobby and like I'm having fun. But the other time, my wife will be very quick to remind people that I spend way too much time on this for it to be considered a hobby.
Yeah. No, I'm glad to hear that, because I think that to a lot of people, especially with YouTube, where it becomes, or social media, when it's probably even harder to see the difference between a passion project and your job. Like for me, for instance, I can say that a passion project is something that I'm not getting paid to make. So I can make a video, post it on YouTube, and that's still a passion project, right? But I guess like that, it becomes like harder to differentiate those two when everything is YouTube or social media.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And again, I feel like for me, some people are like approach it a couple ways. Like I'll just make the passion project, whatever, like just close everyone else out of it. But then it becomes like, well, those are expensive to make. They're time consuming. I could have been doing other work. And so that becomes very expensive in other ways to do passion projects. Passion projects aren't like, well, I'm not making money. They cost me money, not in terms of money so much, but like time away from my family. And so they're like the way that I kind of approach those kinds of things is like, when I'm done making this, I think that there's a brand out there that would love to be attached to it. Yeah. I'm just really bad at figuring out who those people are. And I really don't want to have the conversations about like, hey, are you guys interested? No? Cool. Hey, are you guys interested? No? Awesome. Hey, are you guys interested? Yeah, but you don't want to pay any money? Yeah, cool. We'll keep that in mind, but let's talk to someone else. You know, I don't like doing all that stuff. No. So the bigger the channel gets, the more I start to look for ways to delegate away some of the things that I don't like doing to people who love having those kinds of conversations, that love like connecting with their networks and seeing who wants to be involved and connecting, you know, brands and creators. And so I hired management, I think a year and a half ago at this point, and they handle a lot of that. And so they facilitate a lot of those discussions. So it makes it so that way, you know, I can make some of these things that I want to make, go to some of the places that I want to go, make fun content, and then also have a way that like it's just not only just like the numbers work out from like a bank statement perspective, but it makes it worth it to me. Like my kids are pretty young. My kids are just turned 9 and the older one's 13. You know, like there's a lot of time that I won't get back if I'm gone for say 2 weeks, or if I'm gone or I'm working for a month, you know, somewhere else. And so like that to me has a cost. To them, it has a cost. You know, I'm not having, and to my wife, it has a big cost, because also like I do a lot of the making sure the kids get to wherever they need, to school and also after school. And so those are all like, you know, non-monetary costs that I consider to be very expensive. And so I feel like, you know, to make it worth it to my wife to deal with me being gone, to my kids to being gone, like, you know, the numbers have to kind of like add up. And if they don't, I have to rethink of how much is this project worth to me. And so, you know, these days I'm saying no to a lot more things, not because I feel like brands should pay me more, but more because my time at home is becoming more and more precious.
I think that's a very healthy way of looking at it. And thanks for kind of establishing where you are in terms of the whole YouTube space. And obviously this is the Marathon podcast. So I want to talk more about your running and your relationship to running. Because I know that you said in the intro that you are a non-elite runner, and you have that on your Instagram handle, I think, too, or at least on the name there. But that doesn't mean that you're not a faster marathon runner than most people. Can you just say a little bit about your marathon journey? Because I know that you've improved a lot over the years.
Yeah, so I ran my first marathon with my dad in 2010. It was a couch to marathon, and it was a pretty terrible experience. I recommend that for nobody. I was injured for a long time after that, and then I didn't want to run for a good 5 more years after that. So it was a terrible way to experience a marathon. Eventually, I came back to running. I had run growing up. I had run track and field my whole life. And so like, you know, running has kind of always been a part of my life, and I eventually came back to it, but I came back to it in a little bit of a healthier way, you know, about 2015, 2016. And then by 2017, I think I was ready for another marathon. So I took a 7-year hiatus. My first marathon was like, you know, 4:30, 4:40, something like that. My second one was like an hour faster about. And then my third one was like 317 or something around there. So I made a lot of progress very quickly just by being consistent, not trying to make huge gains. Not that an hour improvement is not a huge gain, but I wasn't trying to make huge gains. I was just like, let's just not be in such rough shape when we get to the starting line. Let's, work on like weeks and months and not like, trying to nail a big workout on a Saturday. And so that really helped out quite a bit. And I've run a bunch of marathons since then, and my PR is currently 2:56. I ran that in Tokyo, and so it's been quite a difference from where I started to where I kind of ended. And now I'm not sure if my PR days are behind me, but I think I might have one more like big push to see if I can improve on that 2:56. But if I leave it at 2:56, I'll be more than thrilled.
Yeah, when you say that you don't know if the PR days are behind you, is that because you think that you aren't able to run faster, or is it because you don't want to put in all the work? Like in terms of ambitions, do you still have a goal of running faster?
I mean, yeah, I'd love to run faster. I feel like for me, I'd love to be able to hit like the Berlin Marathon standard for speedy runners, which for 40 to 49-year-old men is like 250 or 249 or something like that. And that's a lot faster than what I'm currently running. But like, I feel like I feel like after BQ, like that's like the next kind of benchmark I think that exists out there that I think that I can chase after. I don't think that I'll ultimately ever get there because I feel like another like 6 or 7 minutes is just way too much to ask for my body. But I just, like my body's not able to respond as well to training, and so I just feel like I feel like I've lost a little bit of a step, and I don't know if it's just mental. Hopefully it's just mental, but I'm trying. I've been training pretty hard for Sydney, even though it's not an A race. And I know part of it's the summer. I'm really bad with summer running, but we'll see if I can, put in one more hard, serious training block in some milder temperatures and see if I could get, anywhere close to where I've been. And cause it was only like 2 years ago that I ran the 2:56. So it's not like, it's not like it's a 10-year-old PB. So like, I could be right there. I might just be going through a lull, but also, I hear from, people that are older than me that are like, like everything was great. And then 1 year everything tanked. And I'm like, surely there's some lifestyle things going on there. Maybe you didn't want to put in the work, not to blame anybody, No. Marathon training is hard, but, and I'm like, but I'm sure that won't happen to me. And then like last year I was like, I don't know, maybe this is happening to me right now. I just can't run these reps like I used to. So we'll have to see. I'm hopeful, but I think I'm maybe being a little pessimistic, but I'm going to try. I'll die trying, I guess.
Have you been self-coached throughout the whole running journey of yours?
No, I've been, for the most part, I've been self-coached. But it's not like I'm inventing new training modalities or anything like that. I do a lot of reading. A lot of my training philosophies come out of, books that other very established coaches have written. But I've also tried like not in person, but like one-to-one, like remote coaching. I've tried some of the running apps as well to just kind of see what the different, training styles are like. But then I really like tinkering. And so like, I do enjoy being self-coached quite a bit. Just cause I like, kind of like experimenting with what does work, what doesn't work, and kind of like experimenting with what does work, just doing it on my own. Of running is like, I don't need to reinvent the wheel, but I find pleasure in discovering it and exploring it.
Yeah. And I'm curious because now, like, I know that you have a podcast and we've had some of the same guests on, like Jess McLean, for instance. And what I've realized throughout this year, because I started in March and then I realized that the podcast is great because I'm learning a lot, but it can also confuse me a little bit because I have a lot of guests doing different things or approaching running in a different way. And with your podcast, but also being a part of the running community, probably meeting a lot of the best athletes or runners in the world, how much or how are you able to filter the things that you hear from them or the things that they're talking about in terms of their running?
Yeah, so I take it like one, I try to remember that like pros are not like us. They're a different level of like physical capability. And so like you can't be like, oh, this is what this pro does, so I should just do the same and maybe I'll just adjust some of the paces. Like that's not right. You have to like take the spirit of what that workout, what is that stimulus and what is the rest and what are they trying to achieve? And you can try to distill some knowledge from it, but you can't just take like, oh, well, I'll just tweak some of these reps and then it'll be the same. So I try to be like, they're different. They're on a different level, and can their bodies can withstand a whole different level of thing than I can. So that's one way I look at it. And two, the way I look at it is that like, I don't think there's a lot of different kind of training structures that are out there, the ways that people approach training. And I'm always curious to know like what's working for you, because I feel like, pretty much any reasonable plan will get most runners reasonably fit. But those people that are trying to get to that like top 1% of their capability, that's where people have to really drill down into like what's working for me and what's not working for me, even if those things work well for other people. And so like, when people switch coaches, I don't think of it as like, oh, there must have been something bad happening in that relationship, or maybe that coach is terrible. That coach just might not be the right coach for that person at that time in their career, and so like that's the part that I always try to like drill into and figure out is like, all right, what's working for you and why do you think it is, amongst all the other things that have worked well for lots of other people, and so that's kind of how I see all the different like potentially conflicting types of training information that comes in from the athletes that I meet.
It's funny when you're talking about this because it also kind of sounds like the way a lot of people talk about running shoes, which is obviously your field of expertise. And lately I've been trying out the Puma Fast R3, and I've loved them in terms of speed. They're super fast. They feel fast, but I just realized that my legs don't really like them. I get more niggles from it, and it's not like. Not to say that it's not a great shoe, and I know that a lot of people are very happy with it, but for me, it just seems like I've been running with the Nike Alpha Fly, and they've been working great for me. But I'm curious about your take on this. Like, behind you have a lot of shoes, and you obviously work with shoes every day and have access to so many shoes. Does it stress you out at all with all the options, and in terms of like when you're doing a marathon, what shoes to go for? How do you choose?
Yeah, it doesn't stress me out because I love the shoes, and so like having more to choose from is fun, which makes sense as someone that chooses to review shoes for every day. And so the way that I usually choose is by like, what do I like? Like, is it an A race, or can I go out of what I might normally pick if it's just a race that I'm doing because I want to enjoy the race, but don't necessarily want to try and set a PR. And then I also think a little bit about like who's the title shoe sponsor for the race too, if I can match those up. I try to. So those are some considerations that go in there as well. And then I also think about like, well, have I raced in this shoe yet before? Because then having a race in the shoe, whether it's a 5K or a marathon, is useful information for a long-term follow-up review. And so like those are all kind of the things that I go into it. But like the first thing I think about is like, well, what would be fun for this race? That's always the first question.
Yeah. It's really interesting, and I that's why I think that's also kind of the answer to why a lot of us really want to watch those shoe reviews, right? Like you're curious about it, and we appreciate that you wear different shoes for different races, or that you try new ones, because it would have been much harder for us to know what you actually think if we always saw you running races in one specific pair of shoes, and then just in your reviews that you're wearing others. But in terms of the shoe rotation, because that's like a lot of people talk about having different shoes for every workout or every run. How much do you rotate or what is your shoe rotation like in term, say, a normal week?
Yeah. I mean, this like pretty much every day I'm testing a different shoe. And so like, at any moment I'm kind of actively testing about 4 or 5 shoes. And then when you factor in workouts, I might be like, oh, this is going to be a tough workout. Let's go pull out this other carbon plated shoe that I haven't run in a while. And so like, the kind of the group of active testing gets bigger in that sense. But basically I rotate the shoes based on what kind of run do I want to do that day, and what of the shoes that are kind of like most recently in do I need to get some miles in. And so there isn't like a secret, like, well, no one's watching me today, so I'm going to run in my secret favorite shoes. There isn't anything like that. Pretty much every run is like, well, I needed to get some miles in this shoe. And so that's why I picked it, because it's, I have an easy day and I need a daily trainer to test. And so that's how every day is a testing day.
Are you ever tempted to like if you find a shoe that's like, oh wow, this was amazing, are you tempted to just keep on running in that, or are you just so fascinated by all shoes that the like trying them out is more fun than running in a shoe that you loved?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best way to answer that is to say that like I usually do a regular review, so my first review, and then I'll do 100-mile review for shoes that I like. And some 100-mile reviews happen much sooner after the initial review than others, because I just end up reaching for it a lot. And so, most of my miles are daily training, easy miles. So like daily trainers are the ones that tend to get 100-mile reviews the fastest. And so like, if I really like a shoe, I'll just be like, I guess I'll run in this one again. I have an easy run, and this is a shoe that I'm testing, so I'll do it. But I also sometimes will be like, no, wait, the shoe just came out. I did the review like 3 weeks before the shoe came out. If I do a 100-mile review a month later, that doesn't help a lot of people yet. And so I usually like to kind of wait a little bit further and delay. So even if I want to run in a shoe more, sometimes I'll intentionally not. So that way, like the 100-mile review will hit hopefully when either that shoe is now on sale or maybe some of the alternatives are on sale. So I like to intentionally pad some time in there. So like, unfortunately for me, shoes that I really love, I don't get to run in as much as I'd want to. And shoes that I don't like, I kind of have to run in more often than I would otherwise, just because I want to make sure that the timing works out on the shoes. And also like I'm one person. And so like I can't afford to be running a lot of just extra miles in a shoe that's not counting towards some other review. And so like, there's a lot of shoes that at the end of the year, I'll be like, ooh, I could have run another 200, 300 miles in this one because it was so good, but I just don't have the mileage to do it.
No. It's very interesting to hear. And I think that, for me, especially when I find a shoe that I really like, then I will use that a lot, especially because I think that a lot of my reasoning for getting a pair of shoes, or like at least keeping them, would be that I'm not feeling any pain, right? Like, because I'm trying to stay free of injuries. And then it's like, okay, these shoes work well, so I'm going to use them. And then I usually have like 2 or 3 shoes that I will use throughout the week. But then when it comes to like carbon plated shoes, I use those for my workouts. Like early when I was running, then I would also use them for my easy runs. And I guess like that is one of the most hot topics in the running world of like, how much do you use carbon plated shoes and how much or when do you not use them? And after having reviewed and tried so many shoes, what is your take on that?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes people treat carbon like it's radioactive or like it's asbestos. Like carbon in and of itself isn't beneficial or harmful. It's a part of a system, and it's included in a shoe because the manufacturer is trying to attain a certain performance result from it, whether it's to make it comfortable, to make it stable, to make it fast. And so like the reason why we didn't run in our carbon plated shoes every day in the beginning was because they didn't last very long. The foams were not very durable and the shoes were really expensive. And so you would save your miles. And then as shoes became more durable in the race shoe context, as there was carbon plates in those, then people were like, well, I don't mind. I feel good in them. So like, yeah, it's more expensive than running in a daily trainer, but it's worth it to me because I feel good. And so then people were like, oh, but you can't do that every day because it changes the loads you put on your Achilles and all that stuff. And I was like, well, let's ask that person, well, let's wait for the data to come in on that. And now we've had carbon plated shoes for a very long time and there's still people that are wearing them for every run. And as far as I know, and I'm always happy to read something if someone knows differently, but as far as I know, there isn't data that says like carbon plate in the shoe increases injury risk. Mm-hmm. And so like right now for me, the only reason to not run in a carbon plated shoe on an easy day is that carbon plated race shoes are not comfortable for everyday running. They're meant for faster running for the same reason that like I don't own a supercar, but let's say I owned a supercar, I wouldn't take it to go get groceries because it's not well suited for getting groceries. Like the roads that I'd be traveling on have potholes and the suspension is all wrong for driving to go get groceries. And there's no trunk space for me to put in the groceries. So it's a ill-suited tool for that job, right? And that's kind of how I see super shoes versus daily trainers. When I want to get on Nürburgring and go around real fast, supercar is great. When I want to do a hard workout or run a race, super shoes are great. When I want to go get groceries, sometimes my daily run is to the grocery store. Like then I will take the daily trainer, something that has soft cushioned suspension that is well suited to the task, that is going to be comfortable and make me feel good for the next day. So like that's kind of how I feel it. If you like running in carbon plated shoes every day, I'd say go for it. If you don't, then don't. So that's kind of how I see it.
I love that comparison. That's great. And I also think that it's important what you're saying that as far as we know that there's like not at least proven very clearly that there are more injuries coming from the carbon plated shoes, because I guess that is the challenge with the days of the internet of people talking about it, because some people are very opposed to the carbon plated shoes and then they will have very loud voices and opinions about that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think to kind of put a little bit more nuance on that, I think what the studies show is that there isn't across the entire population an increased risk in carbon. I think for certain runners, certainly there's going to be much more risk if they're running in carbon every day based on their gait, their foot strike, their ground contact time. There are some people that will be more susceptible if they run in carbon plated shoes. I don't have science to back that up, but generally I can understand that like reasoning, just as I think that there will be some people that could run in carbon plates every day and never have a negative result from it. So there could be variations within populations, and some people might be more susceptible to injury than others. But I think generally, I don't think there's nothing about the carbon itself that's a problem. Nothing that's more dangerous than, say, a very thick plastic plate that have been in like stability shoes for the last 20 years. So I just think that like, there have been stiffening agents in shoes for a long time. And we never freaked out about those. In fact, we thought that those shoes were better for us because they were stability shoes. So we have to think about how everything's working together.
My reasoning for this, and I'm curious about your take on it, has been that if I go for, I like to see my easy runs as obviously easy runs, but also a way of strengthening my legs. So like, in addition to my strength training, I have my running that I look at as kind of a strength training, because running also will make you stronger in some ways. And then I feel like with a carbon plated shoe, that shoe will help me more so that I like do less of the job myself. Cause or that has been the way I look at it, at least. What is your take on that? Do you feel like that's what carbon plated shoes will do? Or do you think that you will get just as much out of it in terms of that strength training also with a carbon plated shoe?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about that all that much. my first initial reaction to that though is that like I think carbon plated shoes are designed with like a certain kind of foot strike in mind, which I think is related to how your foot would strike the ground when you're trying to run faster.
Mm-hmm.
If you're taking that performance oriented shoe and then running in it like how your foot hits the ground when it's going easy, I don't know that the shoe is more efficient or making it easier for you per se at when you're using it in its non-intended use as an easy run shoe. And to the extent that it is, I think it's probably more the foam than it is the carbon plate. So to that extent that I think you can extend the logic to like, well, any of these new shoes that have really fun foams. Like I love the new Asics Mega Blast, for example. Is that making my running too easy, quote unquote? You know, and so like I don't think it is. It's making it a lot more fun. It's big if my body feels better afterwards. And for me in my easy runs, I don't really look at pace anyway. I might look at pace in the macro, like for weeks and months, but not on any single day for my easy runs. And so like, I'm not too worried about it because a lot of times it's, you know, I still need to cover the distance. And I'm also looking at how long my runs are and how much like time on feet I have in the week. And so I'm not too worried about any shoe making the running feel too easy for me that I'm somehow cheating myself.
I feel like I'm now a great example of a typical runner who's overthinking, you know, like everything with that, because that's what I think that we tend to do too. I've realized this year when I tried more shoes that I may make up my mind and then in my head I'm like, oh yeah, these shoes are more like this, these shoes are more like that. And I'm probably doing the opposite of you where I'm looking at it much more like less on a macro perspective and more like these shoes felt good today. And then if I start feeling pain somewhere, then, oh, it was because of those shoes, right? You know, so maybe we should just all be a little bit less obsessed with it. Still have fun with running shoes, but still don't overthink it as much. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's kind of two things that can happen at the same time. I think a lot of us take our running way too seriously and it becomes stressful. And to the extent that it becomes not helpful, then I think we should, you know, kind of dial it back. There's a lot of data that I just kind of stopped looking at for that reason, where I was like, I don't know how to do anything about those numbers anyway, so I don't know why I'm stressing out over them, and I don't really think I know all that much about what those actually mean. And so I just come like, I don't like vertical oscillation. I'm not going to look at it that much. I'm not going to worry about it. And so I think there's certain ways to kind of like filter out information you do and don't care about to make things more actionable in terms of the data you are collecting. And the other hand, I'm like, this is something that I do for fun. And so to the extent that my mind wants to go down these rabbit holes and explore stuff, I'm okay with that because that's fun for me. I'm having fun doing it. And like, you know, I just think of it as like any other hobby where you're just like getting really into the details and getting super nerdy about stuff. You know, it's fun. And so like, I'm not going to worry about being like, well, I don't want to have too much fun. Or I don't want to get too nerdy about it. But like, that's part of how I enjoy the sport. So I'm going to continue like nerding out over stuff like that.
Oh. In terms of your, like, what I really appreciate about your reviews is that I always feel like I can trust you, right? Like I don't feel like you're trying to sell me anything, but at the same time, you kind of have to work, like being who you are, you have to work with the brands somehow, right? Like you have to, I don't know how you work with them, but like when you're at the Brooks headquarters with the athletes, for instance, how does that work and how are you able to still kind of be so truthful about everything and have those I don't know if you can call it a partnership, but yeah, you're better to say than me. But I don't know if you understand the question.
Yeah, no, I think I understand where you're going with the question. And I think that it's a difficult line to kind of navigate because in the industry of like running shoes, like the brands that would most want to sponsor the kind of content I'm making are the people who I'm reviewing, right? And so then that becomes tricky because then that can become a very quick source of bias, if not actual control, right? And so that's something that you're always going to be worried about, is that like if they're, so I don't ever take money to review a shoe. I don't let a running shoe brand sponsor any of my review videos, right? Apart from that, I have other kinds of videos where I will invite brands to kind of participate more directly into the content, whether that's going to a race that brand is the title sponsor for, and documenting either my experience at the race or documenting the professionals that are racing there. And that may have some of that brand involvement. But there's also a lot of stuff that kind of fits in the middle between that, which is, I think, where they would refer to it as like earned media, where they may pay for, travel and room and board. But like the rest of it is like, you're there they want to tell the media something. And so they've either brought you somewhere or they brought their athletes somewhere, and they're inviting you to tell the story, and they're making themselves available in case we have questions that we want to talk about. And so a lot of the trips that you'll see me go on, I mean, like I'm going to Sydney next week. I'm going with Sports Tours. So that's not a shoe brand, but it's the race travel company. So you'll see a lot of stuff on how that works. And I've gone with them on multiple trips. But like the Brooks trip, for example, I'm there with other media, and people are like, well, it's an influencer trip, but I'm also there with magazines, like running journal, like journalists. And so like, because we make content about it and people get to see it, people are like, oh, look at how, basically these brands are like bribing these influencers. But I'm also like, Runner's World was there too.
Yeah.
And no one's mad at Runner's World. Outside Magazine was there too, and so like, that's how a lot of these things work together, is that like brands, sometimes they go quiet because maybe they're not working on a lot of product innovation, or maybe they're just going through a rough patch. And then they might come out and they say, we've got a lot of stuff we want to talk about now. Let's invite some media in. Let's put on some events for them so that they can really see how both our pros are using it, how they could be using it, and what went into our development cycle, and like why we think this is worth talking about. And so I like trips like that because it gives me insights into like where a brand is going and what they're kind of thinking. It also gives me a chance to really talk to the people that make the shoes in ways where I could be like, why is this like this? Who's this for? It's not for me. So who's this for? Who are you targeting? Like those are the kinds of questions that I like to ask. And those are the things that I think are very visible to people. And so like frequently it'll be like, oh, well, Kofuzi went to Seattle with Brooks and now he loves all these Brooks shoes. And I'm like, for the last 7 years, Brooks hasn't invited me to anything. And they made some changes, some big changes to their product. And I like it. And so like, there's now something to talk about. So like the reason why I wasn't talking about it is because the Ghost hadn't changed in like 7 years.
Yeah.
The Hyperion hadn't changed since the original Hyperion Tempo, like 6 years ago. Now there's big changes and they want to tell the world about it. And I was one of those people that had to go over there. And guess what? They did a good job. And so, I'm trying to call it like I see it. I understand that people will think that like, oh, that seems fishy. And so to the extent that there's some people that are going to think that no matter what, because maybe they like Adidas. And so they're like, anything that's not pro Adidas, I find suspect.
Yeah.
But then, to the extent that other people are like curious about that, I do try to put disclosures in front of everything. Not only just whatever, my governing body, like which is the FCC requires, but like above that, what I think is relevant from like, what is information that I don't think is just legally required, but may impact your decision in terms of what I'm about to say.
Yeah, I love that you do that. I've noticed that. I don't think I even thought about it until was it earlier this year when you were in Tokyo for some launch, and I just saw it like, because it was pretty long text that you had on there, and I was like, this is pretty cool, because then I had the same thought as you were saying. It's not just what you have to have there. There's a little bit more than that, and that makes it more trustworthy for me. So I think it's really smart, but also nice for us as your followers to see.
Yeah, and the thing that I'll kind of caution people, I don't put that in there because I want you to see how trustworthy I am.
No.
I'm putting that all out there because you might not find me trustworthy.
Yeah.
You might say that I have a problem with, and I'm not going to watch this because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's important information to you, that's exactly why I put it there.
Yeah.
And so like I want people to be able to decide how much weight to give whatever I'm about to say after that. That's why I also put it in the beginning.
Yeah.
Within the first minute, hopefully.
Yeah.
Because like anything that comes after that can be colored by how I got somewhere, how a shoe got to me, how a product came into my possession. And so like, it's not a purity spell. It doesn't absolve me of any potential sins, but I'm telling you, this is how it got here. This is how I got here. You can make a decision after that. And so that's the whole point of the disclosure, is to just say, you decide, but I'm letting you know. And after that, it's up to you.
Yeah, I think it's a very nice way of doing it. And then you did mention, like, you were talking about Brooks and how people were like, oh, now all of a sudden it's your favorite brand, kind of. But when, I guess, like, for people not to think that you are biased, like, is it hard for you to, or do you have like a favorite brand that you're in your head? If I say, what's your favorite brand? And I don't know if you want to say if you have one or not, but like, is that something that is, or is it more like each model of each shoe can be so different, so you can like one shoe from this brand and one shoe from this brand?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit more complex than that because, you know, like I have a PO box where all my packages get sent, and the guy that's there knows that I make YouTube videos about running shoes, because he's like, why you get so many packages? And I'm like, yeah, it's all shoes. He's like, what are they? And I'm like, I don't know. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, brands send me stuff, and sometimes I don't know what it is ahead of time. And so he asked me like, so what's the best brand? I'm like, well, it really depends on what you want, what kind of shoe you want, if you're going to be running in it, or you want it to be on your feet or go for walks or in the gym, you know. And then even within, I could pick a brand, but even then, each brand has multiple kinds of ways of achieving the same task, you know. So there might be multiple kinds of daily trainers. So like, it's hard to even say like, well, this is better, this brand is better, you know, top to bottom, which I feel like would be hard. And I always have a hard time with that kind of question, because then I'll say, well, maybe Nike's the best brand. I don't know if that guy's going to go to a running store and buy a Nike shoe, or if he's going to go to a thrift store and buy a used Nike shoe and then say like, well, I bought a Nike because the guy said it was good and it ended up being terrible, you know? And so I always try to be like, well, here's what I like. Tell me if there's a brand that you like. I could tell you what shoes I like, or, you know, it's a little bit, I try not to be too nerdy about it, but I'm like, that's kind of a complicated answer. And so it's hard for me to say that I have a favorite brand. I think that a lot of the brands tend to go in spurts in terms of like activity and innovation. And then I have other brands that are easier or more fun to work with when it comes to projects. Yeah. Or when it comes on to putting on, you know, like shakeout runs or in-person events. So there are some that are like easier to partner with for those kinds of activities. But as far as like a favorite brand running product wise, you know, it's a very complicated question.
Yeah. Is it an easier question if someone asked you? So every year there are new shoes coming out, obviously. And if I was to ask you for 2025, two of the favorite shoes, like if you said an everyday trainer and a racing shoe of 2025, what would you say were your favorites? Would that have been an easier one to answer? And then I'm not talking about a brand, but just a specific shoe. Yeah.
So like my favorite daily trainer would be Evo SL. And so like that's easy because that's a question about me. Yeah. Not what's the best in air quotes, that's different. Whatever that means. Yeah. You know, so like I can answer what I like the most. Yeah. And because I know how I would use it and how I would feel using it. And so Evo SL, and then racing shoe, I really like Metaspeed Ray right now. And so, I mean, I also like new things, which is useful if you're someone who reviews products.
Yeah.
But I love novelty, and that's very novel. It's very new. I just got it, and so that's at the top of mind right now. So those are some two favorites.
Yeah, cool. Last question about shoes before I'm going to ask the last question about Sydney Marathon. And that is, in terms of things that are coming or like new brands, because we obviously have some of the very established brands in the running world. But then it seems like there are some brands kind of coming, knocking on the door, trying to get on the market or get more popular. Are there any brands that you see that will maybe dominate more going forward, or not dominate, but get more on the market and compete with the big ones?
Yeah, I'm probably not a great person to ask for this because I generally don't pay too much attention to the new players in the space. And a lot of it is because like I feel like it's really hard to make running shoe product in 2025 just because of the global way that shoes are produced, the kinds of numbers that are required and things like that. And so it's like, I just think it's very hard to be a real innovator in the running shoe space. So when a new running shoe brand appears, I usually wait for a few years until I start even like kind of thinking about reviewing their product, at least at this point in my career. I usually wait a little bit first to see if it kind of is serious, if it's meant to stick around, if people like it, if if running shoe retailers are liking it. So I usually wait. And the other thing is I always try to limit my reviews because there's so many shoes out there.
Yeah.
I also try to limit my shoe reviews to products that are sold in the United States. The majority of my audience is from the US. And so just as a way of me keeping things simpler, like I know like Olympicus in Brazil is making some good stuff, and the Fila in the variety of regions where it exists is doing good stuff. And there's lots of other international brands that are doing stuff. A lot of the Chinese brands are making some interesting product. But like it's just a lot for me to just kind of juggle. Again, I'm only like one person. And so I limit it to that. And I also try not to get too excited about anyone that's brand new in the running shoe space.
That makes sense. I guess like there are also some brands that can kind of do a comeback where they've been out of the game for a while and then they come back. I don't even know I don't remember the name because we don't have that brand in Norway, I think. But I know that Erik Floberg, he's been trying out some. My fiance, she's from the US, and she's like, "What? Those shoes? They're not. Is it Skechers? What was it called? Skechers. Yeah. And because I saw Erik Floberg running in those, and I was like, what? I never would have thought of them as running shoes, just based on what she's told me. But yeah, it's weird when you see some shoes coming onto the market in that way, and it's hard to know if they're actually serious about it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I have those Skechers, and they're pretty good. But it's always a surprise, and it's hard because Skechers is like, it's not a brand that has a lot of prestige in the United States, and so it's kind of odd to see it, and it's hard to take seriously.
Because that's what
and
she
so,
said.
and so for me, I'm like, all right, okay, let's put the big S on the shoe aside and try to evaluate the shoe on its own, and that's an interesting curiosity for me.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it still has the big S on the side of the shoe, and that carries weight, and that sends signals, and that means something, I think. And so it all becomes part of the shoe eventually, but like, at least in terms of the experience, I try to not think about that too much.
Yeah. Thank you for all of this. I think that a lot of people need to hear a lot of the things that you've been talking about, because like I said, I feel like we're overthinking the shoe thing sometimes. And I really appreciate what you said about, what is a good shoe for me or for you, because that's what we need to figure out. It's not, you can guide us by making those videos of yours, but at the end of the day, it's, I'm going to run in them. And if they don't feel good, it doesn't really matter what anyone else says. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Last question, that is about you and your running. Again, back to that. You are running Sydney, and you're leaving in a couple of days. I guess when this episode comes out, you're in Sydney. What is your goal for Sydney, and have you done that one before?
No, this will be my first time running Sydney, my first time in Australia.
Oh wow!
So yeah, so I'm very excited to head down there. My goals are, I think it's going to be hilly. I think it's going to be a little bit warm for kind of PR racing. So I want to run hard. I've been training hard. I want to run hard. But I want to run kind of like to my fitness. I think I'm going to start right around like my age's BQ pace. And hopefully I can, by the end of the race, end up a little bit ahead of there. But for me in my marathons, it always ends up working well if I start the first 5K a bit slow. And then not trying to negative split per se, but I can kind of like gradually increase, effort a little bit and hopefully stay pretty even in terms of splits. And so if I start right around my BQ pace or faster, I feel like that would be a great day for me.
Yeah. I heard that they kind of modified the course a little bit to make it more flat at the last part of the course. So it seems like they're trying to make it a little faster.
Yeah, that's what I heard too, but I haven't looked too close. Like I said, I'm very ill prepared for this race from a preparation standpoint. From running and training, fine, but logistics, I'm ill prepared, and I haven't really looked at the elevation profile too closely. I know that they did make some changes from before it started down like the majors path in order to make it a little bit friendlier for people to come and try to run fast.
Well, enjoy Sydney. It's an amazing city. I was there last year, and I'm hoping to go do the marathon next year. Great people, and it sounds like they're gonna put on a show. I was listening to a podcast this morning about how they're preparing for it. So good luck, and thank you again for coming on the Marathon Podcast. Really appreciate it, Mike.
All right, thanks so much. I can't wait to head down to Sydney, and I appreciate you having me on the episode today.
This conversation was recorded 2 days before Mike left for Sydney, and I'm just really, really grateful to him for taking the time and doing this. I know that he's got a busy life and a lot of things happening, and him taking the time to guest the Marathon Podcast means a lot to me. So thank you, Mike, for that. I hope that you found this conversation useful. I think that one of the biggest takeaways from this conversation in general is that, at least for me, I tend to overthink and make up my own theories about running shoes. Like, the carbon-plated shoes discussion is interesting. I love to hear Mike's take on that. And also the fact that, like, there's not one shoe that is the best for me or like for everyone. It's more like what's best for me or best for you, and we need to figure out that ourselves, and then obviously people can guide us in some ways. So a great conversation, to be honest. I hope that you found this useful, and if you haven't already, look up Kofuzi on YouTube and Instagram. He's got a lot of really, really good content. For those of you running the Sydney Marathon this weekend, good luck. I hope that it will be a great event. I really wish that I was there. And we are now heading into a time where there's going to be a couple of more Norwegian guests on. We're going to have the world record holder, she was a world record holder in the marathon forever, Ingrid Christiansen. We're having the current season best marathoner in Norway on. That episode will be out on Monday, Marte. And I'm very excited about some other upcoming guests, because I think that you guys will know their names, and I know that they're pretty popular on podcasts. So thank you again for listening. Have a great weekend when Friday comes tomorrow. If you're listening to this at another point, have a great week. Have a great rest of your day. I appreciate you listening, and have a good one. You listen to the Marathon Podcast, brought to you by Wall Studio.